This is our third lesson in, I guess effectively it is apologetics, but the section of apologetics that we have been in for the past couple of weeks are philosophical logical arguments for the existence of God. And again, the purpose of this is to help us realize and give you some evidences for you to know that it can be beyond just a belief in what it is that we have as a worldview. There's a logic to it. There is validity to it. And again, beyond logic, there is scientific validity to it as well. And again, what we're doing right now is going through a few of those philosophical logical arguments for the existence of God. And last week was a little technical. I know there was a lot of numbers thrown at you, and it's hard, even for me, really, to comprehend some of those numbers. But again, last week was the teleological argument, or the fine-tuning argument of the universe, when we look at everything around us, when we look at everything from the cosmos and where we are in our solar system to the very fine details of organisms. Everything is very finely tuned for us to exist the way that we do. If some of those things were not so finely tuned, we wouldn't be here. And again, the argument is that from random unguided processes, namely the Big Bang, because that's the biggest and best theory right now outside of God, all of this order, all of this fine tuning came about. Again, logically speaking, it would seem, if you see order, a mind was there that gave that order. So again, that was last week. And again, before that, we talked about the cosmological argument. Won't get too much back into that one. We'll have a recap over everything. Again, I want this to be usable information for you. But again, very quickly, the cosmological argument, meaning that we had to begin at some point. Either we began from nothing or something helped us begin. It's the law of causality. There must be an uncaused first cause, and that's God in our case. And that's the argument that we make. This week, in this particular class, we're going to be going over the moral argument. And I know this is where originally when I did my class, this is the one that I ended with. And I definitely wanted to come back and hit this one a little more in depth, just because I feel like this one may be the most usable in a conversation, just because we all have a morality about us. Whether, it's the same, whether we follow the same moral codes, we understand that everybody has a certain morality about them. They believe something is right and they believe something is wrong. So again, this is more common ground for more people, okay? So this one today is a little more logical, philosophical, and I will say it is a little more emotion involved. It's a little more emotional just because when you get into specific things, that's right. If you're right, then you're right, and that person's wrong. Or are they? That's where we're going to get to today. So we're going over the moral argument for the existence of God. So really the argument follows like this, and it really helps when you turn this thing on. You would think 3 weeks. Okay. So the argument is generally stated as follows. If objective morality exists, there must be someone or something that sets morality beyond humanity. Objective morality exists. Therefore, there is a morality setter or lawgiver beyond humanity, namely God. Okay. So we got to establish a few things here. Okay. So what this argument is saying is that by objective, there are some things that are always right and there are some things that are always wrong. And this is beyond humanity's doing. It's beyond your opinion, my opinion. These things are right or these things are wrong. This has to be set by something beyond humanity. If it's just beyond my opinion, that would have to be God. So objective versus subjective, that's something that we're going to have to establish first off, okay? So objective is this: the object is true regardless of the subject input. Regardless of what the subject thinks or feels or says, the object itself is true. versus subjective, meaning that the subject decides through feeling, thinking, that type of thing, what is true about the object. Okay. So I'm going to ask you the question, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? What is the best flavor of ice cream? That's really what I wanted to ask. Vanilla? Chocolate, man. I hear a lot more chocolate. Nobody's saying strawberry. Sorry. I don't know. I'm anything but chocolate. I don't know. I'm kind of I'm a complicated guy. I like that Talenti gelato. I don't know if anybody's had that. Man, that stuff's the caramel cookie crunch. If you've not had it, you're not living. So that's the best flavor, just saying. Now, as an example, okay, if let's just say that caramel cookie crunch objectively is the best ice cream, it doesn't matter what your opinion of it is. It just is the best ice cream, okay? Hands down. Doesn't matter. But subjectively, us, the subject, we choose what we think the object is, right? Yeah, of course. There's going to be some of you think, man, you like that stuff? Well, you can have it. You as a subject have decided this. This is really important to understand fully when we're getting into the moral argument, when we're saying something is really right or really wrong, because if things are subjective, then it's just you, the subject, deciding what's right and what is wrong. Me, the subject, that's deciding what is right, what is wrong. But if it is objectively, the action itself, the object is right, then it doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't matter what you say, it doesn't matter what anybody else says, it is just right. Okay. And that's an important thing to understand before we go forward when I use these terms objective and subjective, which I'm sure you already had an understanding, but I had to go over it. So the question really is this then. Are there objective morals? Are there some things that are right always, and are there some things that are always wrong? Within a culture. No, I agree. I think there are a lot of things within different cultures that we see that are acceptable, that are not necessarily acceptable in our culture, right? For instance, if we look at some of the more isolated cultures, say in South America, the way that they dress are not the way that we dress. I don't know, that's getting closer and closer to more acceptable. Let's just say cannibalistic society. Well, it's okay to eat people in that society. That's a morality that they set. Now, is that objectively wrong? It is to us. Well, then us, the subject, are determining that object or that statement. So really, then that's a subjective morality.
What was your original question? Is there an objective moral?
The question is, because if the first premise is true, again, if we go back to what the argument is that if objective morality exists, there must be someone or something that sets the morality beyond humanity. The second premise is objective morality exists. Does it? Does objective morality actually exist? Yes, I think all of us in here, when we understand what we're saying, semantics may get in the way of that for a second, but I think when we understand what we're saying by objective morality, this is just wrong and this is just right. Yes, we as Christians, we're going to say that there are objective moralities because God is that morality setter. God has said, this is right, this is wrong. Right. So us, the subject, we don't determine those things as being right or wrong. It doesn't matter what we think. It matters what God thinks. It matters what God says is what right and wrong. But when we're having this conversation, if somebody doesn't believe in God, how do we traverse this whole situation? So going back to what slide we were on here. So J.L. Mackie states this: there are no objective values This was the first sentence in his book, or Ethics, Inventing Right and Wrong. Richard Dawkins, I know that I've mentioned him quite a bit lately. And again, I bring these people up because they are some of the best in their field, and they are the most well known within the atheistic scientist worldview type people. They're really out in the public, and they state these things pretty blatantly. Richard Dawkins says this in his book, River Out of Even, A Darwinian View of Life. DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is. We dance to its music. And he goes on to say this in the same book. The total amount of suffering per year in the natural world is beyond all decent contemplation. During the minute that it takes me to compose this sentence, thousands of animals are being eaten alive. Many others are running for their lives, whimpering with fear. Others are slowly being devoured from within by rasping parasites. Thousands of all kinds are dying of starvation, thirst, and disease. It must be so. If there was ever a time of plenty, this very fact will automatically lead to an increase in the population until the natural state of starvation and misery is restored. In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, a blind physical forces, genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, others are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties that we should expect if there is, at the bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. I know that was a lot, but that's the belief. And really, right there, that last sentence really, at the crux of it, shows exactly what they think, is that there is no objective moral. There is really no good. There really is no evil. It is what subjectively we determine what is good, what is evil. Kai Nielsen, an atheistic ethicist, that's almost a paradox right there. We have not been able to show the reasons. The reason requires a moral point of view. Pure practical reason, even with a good knowledge of facts, will not take you to morality. So, quite a few things, and again, these are just examples of what people believe in the realm of morality that are, again, the foremost in their field. There really is no good. If you really get down to the crux of the issue for them, there really is no good. There really is no evil. Why is that? On their worldview, why isn't there a good or an evil objectively? Right, they don't believe in God. That is true. Say that a little louder. How do you know what's good if you don't have the standard of what good is? And again, what some would say, and this is just to be fair, well, good is what defined as, when we see purpose, right? We see that in everyday life. We use things for a certain purpose all the time. I'm using this computer to present this information to you. I'm using this clicker to, go through the presentation. That clock is keeping time really, really well. There's a purpose. So I know what good is. And when that doesn't keep its purpose, I know when it's not good. And there's a variation in that. So there's my standard. Sure. Well, exactly. So we can teach ourselves standards. We don't need God. Okay. So what did you mean? I don't want to misrepresent what you said. I'm playing devil's advocate here just a little bit. Yeah. But so I've already just shown you that we don't need God to know what good is because it's based on purpose.
Well, we kind of jumped from morality to good and evil.
Well, isn't morality about what's good and what's evil?
I don't necessarily the good and evil could be more subjective. They can go back to the different cultures, but the morality, I mean, who is without morals? Back to those cultures, all cultures have morals, whether they're Christians or how pagan they are. There's generally some sort of morals involved in their lives and how they structure their lives and their rules.
So show me the difference between morality and good and evil. What do you mean by morals? If it's not saying, hey, this is the right thing, what you ought to do, and what you not.
As a Christian,
Mhm.
we can pretty much recognize good and evil because we've got something objective to reach to.
Sure.
And a non-Christian, they have morals.
Absolutely.
And they may not even have a knowledge of the existence of God, but their morals within the tribe or their country. But so there's a fine line there between morals and good and evil. And
Is there though?
I think there is, because we kind of jumped. We were talking about morals and then good and evil based on a Christian. Yeah, that's pretty easy. That becomes objective.
Well, sure, but I see what you're saying. But when we're having the conversation, and I was playing devil's advocate a little bit, and when we're talking,
And I am too.
sure, and I'm glad we're having this because that's where they go. What they'll say, and what a major defense is that morality is set by cultural organization, and over time through evolution, through a byproduct. And this is on another slide, and we'll get to it. But hey, since we're there, we're going to go there. Okay, this is really the source of morality. Okay, that what you think is right and what you think is wrong is based off what your daddy and what your mommy has told you. And what they get that from is from millions of years of human development and where you are geologically, what that tribe, what that society has determined is right and what is wrong. Am I representing what you said?
Maybe there could be exceptions to that, but maybe.
Okay. But overall, that's the non-God believing view of how morals came to be, was that based on society's views of what they determine to be acceptable behavior, that's what your morality is. Now, I'm not saying you have to adhere to it, just saying that's what, in general, those people believe as a morality, what is good, what is wrong, what is evil, what is not, that type of thing. And again, like we've already said, there are some societies that believe cannibalism is a good thing. It can be done and should be done in certain circumstances. We would say that should pretty much never be done, right? And there's a difference there. Is that just societal? Or do we have some things, guiding processes, are there some things that are always good and always evil? That's the question. Can we prove as Christians, as people, are there some things that are objectively wrong all the time? No matter what society, no matter who you are as a subject, are there some things that are always wrong? Or is it just your opinion? Is it just your society's opinion on what's right or wrong? I'm sorry, you had raised your hand. Go right ahead.
I was just going to say that good and evil are objects, just like sheep and goats.
Okay.
Are objects used in the Bible to determine objects, and morality would be the way we feel and the way we judge what's a sheep and what's a goat. It's the way we feel about the object. That's the difference.
Okay. Now, a moral, if you have a moral, when you define that, what does that mean? It's how you think about something then?
What is this object good? Never mind,
It's okay. These things, look, morality, and especially for this conversation that we're having now in this lesson, even though there may be some fine differences, what I mean by this is a belief of what is right or what is wrong. Morally speaking, what was the intent? Was it a good intent? Was it a bad intent? Was there any intent at all? And really, a moral decision takes intent, typically. If you do something absent of intent, did you mean for it to happen? If, let's just say, I pushed you down, was that a wrong thing for me to do? Well, it depends.
Situational.
It depends. If I pushed you out of the way of a moving car, was that not the right thing to do? So again, there's an element of intent with morality in that. And was it a good intent? But what makes it a good intent? Why should I have saved you? What makes your life worth saving? If we're going to get down in the deep of this, if you believe there is no God, your life has no purpose. Why? Because this was an accident. Does anything purposeful come from an accident? No, by definition, it was an accident. There was no purpose. And that's really where I was getting at with the initial comment earlier in my playing devil's advocate. Well, we know what good is because of the purpose. Well, if our lives have no purpose, it doesn't matter if we exist or not. It doesn't matter if we have pain or not. It doesn't matter if we have happiness or not. It doesn't matter at the end of the day because our lives don't have purpose. And it's kind of a bleak way to look at it, isn't it?
Just in the statements you made about Richard Dawkins,
Mhm.
the fact that he used an adjective to describe something as happy or as miserable is an instinctual morality.
Agreed. And you'll hear throughout this, and what I want you to recognize is that good gets interjected quite a bit. And it is a measure of purpose. Hey, how well is whatever this is fulfilling the purpose? If it's fulfilling most of the purpose, it's good. If it's not fulfilling that purpose, it's a deviation of. And really, that's what good and evil is. Sin. Does anybody know what the definition of what sin actually means? Somebody said it, I think. Missing the mark. God has set a mark for us to hit. If we don't hit that, the further away from that mark we're missing, it's the definition of evil. And that's an important thing to hold on to. We'll get to it here in just a moment. I know we're kind of all over the place, but we're in a good place. This last one, I do want to just go ahead and throw it out there really quickly, even though I don't know if I want to get down this road. Meta ethics. This was a video on YouTube. I just wanted to see what was out there. I'm a curious person. I'm sure a lot of people in here are curious as well. I just looked this guy up, and I wanted to know a little bit more about what people think about morality and objective morality in the absence of God. And the title of his video is that there are no objective moral truths, the Philosophy Lab YouTube channel. So if you want to check him out, there you go. But in his statement, in his premise, he actually only has one premise and one conclusion. And his argument was that there are no objective truths. Therefore, there are no objective moralities. You can't prove something to be true 100%. So why could there be something that's objectively right or wrong? Anybody see a problem with that?
I would ask, because I think what he would probably counter you by saying is, if you can't prove the subjective truth, then how would you prove that it is objective morality in order to make the morality argument, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that makes his conclusion legitimate, but I'm saying that in a way that seems more like a demonstration of why the moral argument can't be true.
Right. And his argument is that there's nothing objectively true. I don't know. Maybe it's just the way my mind works, but I would ask him, then isn't that a truth claim? Doesn't that refute your argument? No, I did too. I kind of thought, well, you're making a truth claim here. You're saying that there's no objective truth. Is that true? We don't know. So again, when you start looking, go ahead.
I was just going to say, looking at the screen and the middle of Dawkins' quote that you have up there, it says, "The name just is."
Mm-hmm.
So I would ask why, how, when, where. I mean, I think, I understand why we're studying this, but I think most of the people that we encounter believe that there is God. They just don't believe that they need to structure their lives to His will. A very small percentage of people, according to the internet, think like Richard Dawkins. We call those people atheists. I mean, even a high school graduate is going to say, well, how can you prove DNA just is? And why is DNA just it? And the whole reason he said that is because it doesn't go below DNA. They haven't figured out how to get it below DNA. And they haven't figured out how to control the DNA fully. Yes, they can cut and splice. But then there's the whole morality argument there. Aren't you playing God?
Well, if there's no God, then there's no problem.
Exactly.
Well,
Richard Dawson may have chosen that which is miserable over that which is wonderful. You know, ultimately, I think it maybe boil down to that. You know, do you see that darkness is as light, or light is as darkness? I choose that darkness as light. You know, I think that the Bible kind of backs that up by saying that you are the light.
and you know, you make an important analogy there. Darkness can't. We wouldn't know what darkness was without light. But if there's all light, then it can exist without darkness. Does that make sense? There might be something in the way of that light that creates darkness on the other side, but it can exist in of itself without darkness, that being God. And that's where we're getting to. That was a good comment. And to get back to what you were saying, I agree to an extent, but I have come across more and more people that have stated, I don't believe in God. I mean, that's been disproven because most of the curriculum now that's being taught is that the evolution that we see, okay, and that's where this study is going to lead to. I want to really flesh out what evolution is. Do you guys believe in evolution? I do. But what are we talking about? Evolution is change over time. I believe in change. I've changed over time. You've changed over time. We really need to define what terms we're talking about. And that's really what we're trying to do in this class, and we're going to get to that. But I have seen an alarming number of people, because I think somebody had mentioned this last time, what you start to realize is that if you do have a God, you have an imposed morality on you. People want to live the way they want to live. And so you start looking for a natural way to explain how we get here in the absence of God, and you, the subject, get to choose what you want to do, right? But I agree, in the South, you're not going to meet very many people that probably don't believe in some version of God. That's true. But I have a professor right now that has all but said, I don't believe in God, and I kind of think people who do believe are not as smart. We'll just put it that way. So
But even if you took someone in a vacuum, if
Sure.
you found someone in the world and you took them in a vacuum,
Mhm.
and you asked them, how do you know which decisions to make on a daily basis? How do you know what's right and wrong? Ultimately, they're going to describe that as saying, there's something in me that just knows that that's right or wrong. Okay,
Yes.
well, and you can then take that and you can build on it. And it's all the other stuff that's floating around that makes it so difficult to convert.
I 100% agree.
And the selfishness and that's the, if we get to why are we doing this, that's ultimately
Sure.
why it's easier to go to those vacuums, those foreign countries that convert people, because they're looking for something. They want something that makes sense.
Oh,
Whereas us,
absolutely.
We just kind of hold our arguments on top of each other like we're doing right now and get nowhere.
Well, and look, there are a lot of people that just want to argue. That is 100% true. But again, we as Christians are charged to have a ready defense for our faith. And in the increasing number of people that are not believing in God, this is a way to do that. And that's another purpose for what we're doing this. But to what you just said, Richard Roos stated this, and he is a atheist himself. The man who says it is acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man that says 2 + 2 is 5. So what you just said, that people in a vacuum, when you look at certain things, people just know certain things are wrong, certain things are right. But again, if you take that statement and you ask somebody else, you ask a pedophile that, and they're going to be honest, they'll just say, that's your opinion. It's not my opinion.
I don't think so. I think they know it's wrong.
But that's your opinion.
No, I
Don't
don't
tell
think, I don't think it is just my opinion. I think there is. Past God, there is absolute moral things that, I don't think anybody rapes a 5-year-old child and thinks that's okay. I don't think, even if you were absent law and order, and I don't think anybody would do that in the broad daylight and say that's.
It's hard to accept that somebody would actually think that was okay, right? I'm right there with you. Okay, let's make that clear for the record. Okay, I don't want to play devil's advocate too well here, but I agree with you 100%. And I think what you're starting to see is that even if you don't have God in your life, you don't believe that God exists, you can still be a moral person. You can still do good things. You can still do bad things. I'm not saying that it takes God to know what is right and wrong necessarily. I'm saying it takes God to justify what is truly right and truly wrong. Because if that little child didn't have a purpose, then it doesn't matter what happens to it. If I'm speaking plainly here, and I know that's harsh, but it's the truth. If it didn't have a purpose, it doesn't matter what happens to it. And that's a really hard position emotionally and morally to hold. But Richard Dawkins just stated right beforehand, did he not, that cruel things are happening all the time. Things are always in fear. Things are being eaten alive. Things are getting taken advantage of. Fill in the blank. He's saying that's exactly what we expect to see. Now, here's the thing. I think we look at that and we say, yeah, that's just wrong. Across the board, that's wrong. Okay? And even he, as an atheist, says the man who says it's acceptable is just as mistaken as the man that says 2 + 2 is 5. To live in that kind of worldview is not really doable. Just because you have to then concede that something like that is okay for somebody else because the subject decides what's right and wrong. And again, we look at what Hitler did. As a society, they decided there were certain people that were inferior. There were certain people that didn't deserve to be on this earth anymore. And in the name of evolving the human species to a more and better race, wiped out how many millions? Why were they wrong? If we're here without God and they decide as a society that was the right thing to do, who are we to say? Now, here's where things get just a little dicey. Okay. Before I get there, I do want to hit this. Okay. If there is objective evil, then there is objective good. Okay. It's really easier to show things to be objectively evil than good. Typically say, well, you think that's good. Well, I don't. But all of us on an emotional level have just this gut-wrenching feeling when that example gets brought up, right? Well, yeah. And worse examples could be brought up to really make the point. Won't do that. But everybody has a gut wrench. Yeah, that's just evil. Just going to go ahead and say it. Blanket statement. It is evil. If that's the case, then there's an objective good because you're missing a mark here. And if there's objective moral values, then there must be a moral lawgiver beyond humanity. C.S. Lewis had this interesting thing to say about justice. And I'm not sure how many people really know about C.S. Lewis, but he used to be an atheist. He did convert to Christianity, and he has a lot of great writings. But this is what he said concerning justice. Okay, he says, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how did I get this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? If the whole show was bad and senseless from A to Z, so to speak, why did I, who was supposed to be a part of the show, find myself in such violent reaction against it? Of course, I had given up my idea of justice by saying it's nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. For the argument depended on saying that the world was so really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my fancies. Thus, in the very act of trying to prove that God did not exist, in other words, that the whole reality was senseless, I found I was forced to assume that one part of reality, namely my idea of justice, was full of sense. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning. Just as if there was no light in the universe, there are no creatures, therefore no creature with eyes, we should have never known it was dark. Dark would be without meaning. Kind of getting back to what you were saying there just a little bit. C.S. Lewis, again, has a lot of great things to say. And I love, again, the first line is that, where did I get my idea of just and unjust? That was just your subjective opinion of what was just. Is there any justice for a person if there is no lawgiver at the end to judge our actions? No, there is no justice. Only what we have instituted as men and women. But here's really where the rubber meets the road, because when you establish something as evil, this is really where the argument gets flipped back on the Christian. We got 5 minutes. Be interesting to see if we can get this done in 5 minutes. Just hang with me here, okay? And again, I don't want to not give you some counter arguments here, although we've already been dabbling into devil's advocate quite a bit this go around. The problem with evil. If you are an atheist, and I've seen this done many times in debates, Christopher Hitchin does it particularly well if you know who he is. The problem with evil is a hard question sometimes to answer, because this is how it gets done. The atheist says, okay, I will grant you there's an objective evil out there. I'll grant you that. Why then would I believe in your God, who is supposed to be all good, all knowing, all present, all powerful, have the ability to stop things, and he doesn't? And A, if he is all good and can't be in the presence of evil, create a world with so much in it? Is it not a paradox to say that if he can't be around sin, he created this world full of it? You want me to believe that? You're crazy. I won't. How do we answer that question? And I know that I got into that a little bit last time, but that's an uncomfortable place to be if you're not ready for it. And maybe you thought of this yourself. Maybe this is something you struggle with too. And I want to have that conversation because it's an important one to have. How does that happen? If you're asked that question, or those two questions, meaning that if God, being who he is, created the world, did he not create evil? And B, why does he allow it to persist?
Because of free will.
Free moral agents. We're free moral agents.
Okay, so we're free moral agents, but didn't he create us? And so therefore he created evil.
We're not evil individually until we make the choice to be.
Like, you know, it's evil to exist. He didn't create.
How about a proxy war between God and the devil and us in the middle?
Didn't he create the devil?
But
So he created the ultimate evil then.
There's still a battle.
Well, then he created the battle because he created everything.
But he doesn't make
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't hear something back here. I know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. Really, I don't want to beat down the point too much. I don't want to play, again, devil's advocate too well, you really got down to the crux of the issue. And again, I said this last time, and it was a while ago, but this is where I like to go with it. Is it inherently wrong to eat fruit? Is it evil to eat fruit? Not unless God says, don't eat fruit. What was the first sin?
Actually, that was the first sin of humanity.
Correct. I do want to make that statement. That is true. Okay. Now, for us, that's literally how to answer the question. If God created everything, did he not create evil? He didn't create evil. He created being moral free agents to make a choice and gave us a choice. He did create the situation where we could have evil in our lives or commit evil, but he didn't create evil himself. That's the important distinction, because there is one. He didn't actually create us evil. He created us with the choice. Why would he do that? Couldn't he have just created us just to love him without free will?
That's called slavery. I always tell my children when we study stuff, this world's a proving ground. This world is God put you here to decide, and gave us free will, and gave us the options. You're going to go this way or this way, and he wants those that are going to take the narrow path. I mean, it's you have a choice, and that's the simplest way I know to say it. This world is a proving ground.
To your point, what you're saying is really you're playing off James 2. Faith without works is dead, right? You can say that you have faith all day long, but if you're not out there actually proving yourself, then do you have an alive faith? Don't want to necessarily get away from what we were just saying, but you're exactly right. Giving somebody the free will to choose allows us to demonstrate love. It's not love if we don't have a choice. If we have a choice and we're being given all these things we can sense physically with all of our five senses, and we choose God, who we can't really experience that way, is that not an ultimate form of faith and love? And Hebrews says that it's impossible without faith to please God. God has created a scenario for us with free will to choose him over a bunch of different choices. Okay. And if God interceded today with us, stopping every little thing in our lives, and again, we don't have the foresight that God has, with everything that seems tragic to us. If he did that, then how much free will do we really have? If God interjected himself in every single scenario of our life, do we really have free will?
Jesus wouldn't have had to die.
Right? So again, that's kind of the road you go down. And yes, there's no way to avoid talking about our specific belief system in the Bible that somebody may not necessarily adhere to or believe. But at the same time, if they start asking you questions about your God, this is where you go. This is how you answer those questions. And again, they're tough sometimes, especially when they catch you off guard, but there are answers out there. And I agree, maybe I should get started a little earlier if we're going to talk about this. But hey, it's only 3 minutes after, right? I mean, it's not too bad. But before we do end this class, I want to ask, are there any comments or any questions? I know that's kind of because at the end of the day, if you have a question, I guarantee you somebody else has a question too. Maybe the same question. So any comments, questions? Yes.
I have one question. And that
Okay.
would be simply Satan. You said God created Satan. God did not create Satan. Satan made the choice as an angel to make the wrong choice, to have pride, to feel that he could overpower God. At least that's my understanding of how Satan came about. He wasn't created by God specifically as Satan. He was created as an angel and made the choice
Well, there's the delineation there, and that really is how you answer that. You've got to separate those things. Yes, we are created beings, but we were created beings with a choice, and that has a lot of connotations with it. But if you conflate those two things, it can, make assumptions that are tough to get around sometimes. And yes, that's exactly right. I believe the same thing. You had something.
Yeah, and I'll take you over just a couple of minutes.
We're already over. It's
So,
fine.
Okay, so the thing is that folks have been asking us how our transition from the West to Tennessee has been. And I tell them it's been refreshing because we've come to an area, kind of like you were saying, God-fearing folks. But when I met with the shepherds, I told them trouble's coming because one of the reasons moving out here is because of what's happening in the West. And so when you talk about a professor that, does not believe in God, folks, there's a lot of people that don't believe in God. Even when you go to Genesis chapter 19, we talk about pedophiles, right? Lot and his family lived in a perverted, part of that nation that, that even Abraham moved to, right? And turned an eye, even offered up his daughters, knowing it was wrong. And so the thing is that what I would ask us to do, we need to pray for our nation. We live in an area that is going to quickly turn. If we don't teach our children, if we're not examples, we don't work in our communities. And so the thing is that, again, God has given us a choice.
100% agree with you. And not to be all doom and gloom, but you're exactly right. I don't want to necessarily point fingers too much, but you're right. We have seen quite a bit of shift. The further west you go, we got a lot of people moving in from the west too. So we need to be ready with a few things to have some conversations and hopefully change minds, hopefully change lives. And thank you for saying that, because you have a little more, validity in saying what you're saying. Because did you come from California? Arizona. Okay, almost.
So we've got someone from California that can vouch for it.
Yep.
It's a pit of sin.
Do what?
A pit of sin.
Well, you heard it there, folks. So and look, not that we don't have our own problems here in Tennessee, because we do. We have our own grounds to go and work for sure, but we can be the change. Did you have one more thing?
I wanted to just say, as a young girl, I don't really know for sure how old I was, but I was a very young girl one night in my yard, laying in the grass, and it was dark. And I was looking up in the sky and seeing the stars and everything. And I wasn't brought up in the church. I wasn't, necessarily taught about God. I mean, I feel like we are all created innately with a sense of right and wrong. But my point about bringing this little story up is I remember, like it was yesterday, laying in the grass. I mean, the little kids don't really get a chance to really do that very much nowadays.
Sadly.
But I was in our yard, just laying in the grass, just feeling the enormity of the sky and feeling so small. But for some reason, I felt that I did matter. I did have a purpose. And the truth that I really believed in that moment was that I wasn't responsible for being me, for being where I was, for viewing what I was experiencing. And I didn't have nothing to do with it. I didn't have nothing to do with where I was born, where I lived,
what family I was, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
I did not have that choice. I did not have any responsibility with where I was. I was just this little girl. I feel like I was experiencing God. And I may not have realized it was God at that point, but ultimately,
What you're describing, and this is actually when you go and look at philosophical arguments for God, there is actually a subsection of it that's defined as religious experience. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're having. And we all, I'm sure, have been somewhere and just been in awe and thought, man, you know, how great is God? You know, how great is this? This has to be part of something bigger. And sure, and that is fantastic. And there's a lot of people that way. There's some people that don't. But you know what's interesting, and to your point, and this I guess is a great way to end it because I know people have kids to go and get. But this is what I'll say. When we do try to make ourselves happy and we go after selfish ambitions and get things that we wanted, how much depression, how much sadness, how much distraught do we see with people with so much gain trying to fill this God-shaped hole in their life that they're not filling it with God, even if they don't believe it or not. We're a country now ridden with depression. Why? We have a purpose. Innately, we have a purpose. If we're not fulfilling that purpose, it affects us greatly. Whether we want to say it or not, it does. And it's having a profound effect on us as a country. And that's a whole nother discussion in of itself. So I won't necessarily go down that road too much more. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. Thank you everyone for sharing. This is not an easy one necessarily, but it's a really good one to go over. So having said that, we'll say a quick prayer, and they hit it again. They're like, hey, get out of there. Say a quick prayer, and I'll let you get out of here. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for all the many blessings of it. We're so grateful for you giving us everything that we have. We thank you for being so good. We thank you for giving us an avenue of getting to heaven to spend eternity with you. Lord, help us to be those shining lights out in the world. Help us to have good and constructive conversations with people to help lead them to you. Lord, again, I pray that you do forgive us when we fail you, when we fall short. Lord, we know that as Christians, we are covered by the blood of Christ, and how amazing is that blessing. We thank you so much for it. Again, we thank you for every blessing we have. I pray that we be good stewards of those blessings, but we thank you most of all for your Son, what he's done for us, and what his sacrifice means for our eternity. We ask this in his most wonderful, holy, and high name. Amen.